Hello, everyone. Thank you all for making the time to join us at our fifth annual Cardinal Service webinar. Today, we're excited to highlight student, alumni, and faculty voices as they share with us their public service journeys. My name is Kamba Tshionyi, and I'm the Director for External Relations for the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education in the Haas Center for Public Service. And I'm delighted to MC today's webinar. So you're going to see me up here regularly as I bridge between today's speakers and guide the Q&A. Before going any further, I want to say thank you. It's because of the generosity of many of you that Cardinal Service, which is the initiative to make principled public service a distinctive feature of the Stanford experience, it's because of you that Cardinal Service has expanded, thrived, and given students access to these powerful, often transformational experiences of public service learning. So what are you going to hear today? You'll have the chance to hear from a graduate student at the Dorr School of Sustainability, an undergraduate and recent alumna in conversation, and a faculty member. The through line or theme is that each of them has been involved with climate policy and/or energy equity. We've also reserved some time for pre-submitted questions. Thank you to those of you who did submit those in advance. For any questions that come up during the conversations, or if we don't get to your pre-submitted one because of time, we're going to do our best to follow up with each of you individually. As many of you know, in 1985, Stanford was one of the first research institutions to establish a comprehensive public service center. Today, the Haas Center is recognized as one of the preeminent public service centers in the country. And as I personally think about the moment we're in broadly, I believe that it's incumbent on Stanford, as well as others, to think about how to rebuild public trust and demonstrate the legitimacy and value of higher education, especially in the communities that we live within, interact with, and partner with. And putting principled public service as a central component of a Stanford education is a really critical way to do this. And our program continues to thrive. Some very, very quick numbers. There were over 100 affiliated volunteer student groups where students often begin or continue exploring their passions while learning more about the principles of ethical and effective service. Nearly 3,000 students participated in community-engaged academic courses and research where they got to put theory into practice. 650 students completed 9 to 12-week-long full-time stipended public service internships, and we had 31 graduating students launch their public service careers through post-graduation fellowships. But no numbers without stories, no stories without numbers. I gave the quick numbers, and shortly, you're going to have a chance to hear more about the stories from today's speakers. But before I get out of the way, I want to reiterate our sincere thanks to all of you who support our work. And it's not simply funding our programs and operations, which of course is necessary, but about how you engage as alumni and committed partners in this work. I'm excited to see where, with your continued engagement, this year takes us. So to kick us off, I'd like to welcome a special guest, Dianne Calvi, to the virtual podium. Dianne is a Stanford alumna, class of '84, a National Advisory Board member, having joined recently, and impressively, she was the recipient of the President's Award for the Common Good. And she's going to share some quick thoughts with you, as well as give a quick update on the award nominations this year. Dianne?
Thanks, Kamba. Hello, everyone. As Kamba mentioned, I'm Dianne Calvi, and I serve on the National Advisory Board. I've also been the president and CEO of Village Enterprise for the past 14 years, and was honored, as Kamba mentioned, to receive the President's Award for the advancement of the common good last year. I've had the privilege of leading a passionate team working in 8 countries in Africa to end extreme poverty through entrepreneurship, innovation, and collective action. But my journey in public service started as a young person at Stanford, and those formative experiences shaped my career. As a NAB member, I've had the wonderful opportunity to get to know Stanford students who have been engaged with the Haas Center. And I truly believe that those students who engage in public service through the Haas Center are building a strong foundation to become future leaders and potential recipients of the President's Award for the Common Good. The students that I've met are truly inspiring and exemplify what it means to lead with purpose. And that's why I'm excited to announce the call for nominations for the President's Award for the Common Good. This prestigious award honors Stanford alumni who have made extraordinary contributions to public service and the common good. We're looking for nominees who demonstrate purpose, impact, and leadership in solving social problems. Nominations can be made by alumni, staff, or faculty members and can be submitted through November 3rd. Please check out the link in the chat for more details on how to nominate someone. And thanks for helping us celebrate our classmates and colleagues doing amazing work in public service.
Thank you so much, Dianne. I absolutely understand what you're talking about, and it's really beautiful to think about sort of the formative students right now who can be potential future impact recipients like this, and helping how public service is helping shape their path right now. So again, thank you, Dianne. I'm now delighted to introduce today's first speaker, Hannah Melville-Rea. Hannah's a PhD candidate at the Dorr School and has worked with Haas through and you know how we love acronyms, through PCJ in the Bay, so Partnerships for Climate Justice in the Bay Area. And I'm going to pass the invisible mic over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Kamba. You have an incredible lineup of speakers today, so I am so honored to be able to share my story with you. I grew up in the northern part of Osaka, Japan, until the age of 18. And some of my most memorable experiences were hiding under my desk and doing earthquake drills, or being in a room where everyone's phone would go off on an alert system before the shaking would begin. And in 2011, after the big earthquake that triggered a tsunami, being involved in the fundraising and recovery efforts for that. Then I moved for undergrad. I went to NYU Abu Dhabi. And something that I remember really clearly was that it wouldn't rain often, but when it did, the campus would immediately flood. And the campus and the city, it was just built for a climate that wasn't changing and one that wasn't prepared for higher participation events. After graduating from undergrad, then I moved to Australia, which is where I have citizenship, and I worked in climate policy at a think tank and also at Parliament House. And in this role, I really got to see directly how federal spending in the disaster space, almost all of it was going to response and recovery for the massive bushfires and flooding that we experienced. And a very small portion, I mean, around 3%, was being spent on prevention and preparation. Through all of these contexts, something that has struck me is that whether it's earthquakes or fires or floods or even COVID, the experiences are not shared equally, and that there are always vulnerable populations at the front lines of these events. And so that has made me really interested in this question of how can we more equitably prepare for climate disasters? And that question is what led me to a PhD at Stanford. So when I think back to my first year here, I had just moved across the Pacific Ocean, this new space, and I just felt like I was in a palm tree paradise, and I was living and working and socializing on campus. And it felt like even though I was in this new context, I was in a bubble. And it didn't really help that I was also reading very theoretical academic papers, and most of my time was spent like this, doing statistics and doing a lot of quite intensive coursework in my first year. So even though I had come to study inequity and climate resilience, I felt like I was unanchored in the work that I was trying to do. And that's when I heard about Partnerships for Climate Justice in the Bay Area. And so this is the Haas Center's place-based initiative, and they partner with 10 different organizations across the Bay. So I applied to participate for my first summer, and I got to work with One Shoreline. which is San Mateo County's local agency for sea level rise and flooding. These were all my colleagues from the summer, and I think immediately I really felt the difference of taking the Caltrain and commuting to work and talking to people who are not at Stanford. And one of my favorite projects and a highlight was really working on flood resilience in the city of San Bruno. So San Bruno Creek, it actually makes a 90-degree turn because the airport was built where the creek used to stream out to the bay. And because of that, this neighborhood of Bel Air is facing quite chronic flood events. Bel Air is also a majority non-white area, very linguistically diverse, and a disadvantaged community according to Callan Bioscreen. And my colleague McKenna and I, during my summer fellowship, we did a site visit. And I remember, on my left was an elevated highway, on my right, Highway 101. In front of me is a PG&E substation. And then I just hear the booming sound every few minutes of airplanes flying overhead. So quite different to the palm tree lined Stanford campus. And we got to talk to a resident named Raul here. And he really changed my thinking. For one, I think I had come in with this assumption that we were the local government agency, we were going to find solutions. But talking to Raul, who had beautifully lined sandbags outside his garage, he'd elevated his car, elevated appliances in his garages, really learning from experiences with flooding and taking steps to be more resilient. It showed me how much localized community knowledge is already on the ground that we need to be tapping more into. And the second thing he told me was he was identifying flood impacts that I didn't even have on my radar. So for example, he said that flood insurance is getting extremely expensive and it's like paying for a second mortgage. So in the theoretical kind of literature space, I had always thought of insurance as something that improves our adaptive capacity to live with climate change. But here he showed me that actually it can be challenging when applied in spaces that are already lower income. And so I think this experience was a pivotal moment for me and for One Shoreline. We realized we had to do more of this work. And so through the next winter, One Shoreline, partnering with another PCJ partner, Rise South City, a community-based organization, began to collect more stories from residents about how they're experiencing flood events. And my summer fellowship, it did not end there. I continued in my capacity as a PhD student and with a team at Stanford to analyze those listening sessions, to document what kind of actions people are taking, as well as to really look at flood insurance data and to pull that in for the community. I'm very excited that next week we get to share this knowledge back to the community. We have a workshop in English and Spanish, and that residents who have been contributing to this research will also have equal access to what we're learning. So I came to Stanford and felt very ungrounded, but as you can see, my experience with PCJ, this was really what has grounded me in the community and grounded me in service. And today I get to continue my work now, starting my second term on the advisory board. I help shape the program and get to give other students an equally transformational experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, for sharing that experience. It sort of felt like a TED Talk. It was nice to go in there, and sort of the picture I get is you're sort of the corpus callosum, the piece that connects the two parts of the brain, kind of the theoretical that you're studying, and then going out in community is the other side, and you're sort of that bridge to it. So thank you for sharing your experience. Next up, we're going to dive into a conversation between Dylan Vergara and Caroline Spears. Caroline, we're excited to have your perspective as a relatively recent alum, now working in climate policy. And Dylan, looking forward to hearing your insights as a current undergraduate who's in the thick of things. Thank you both for your time and take it away.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited to be here with Dylan and talk about our current and past experiences with Haas and how Dylan and I actually have so much overlap on how we've experienced the Haas program. So I'm really excited to talk about that today. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Caroline Spears, and I graduated in Stanford in 2018. I have a bachelor's and a master's in civil and environmental engineering, really focused on atmospheric science. And I like to say that my degree at Stanford is climate science and climate solutions. And I actually think two of my former teachers might be on this call. So Dave Rogers or Jeff Brown, if you're listening to this, thank you. Y'all were fantastic teachers, and I really appreciate all of these programs. So where that's led me today is I'm now the Executive Director of Climate Cabinet. We are Moneyball for climate policy. As some of you may know, we are in the middle of an election cycle, and it's not just the president. America elects over 500,000 people to public office every cycle, an enormous number of people. And what we do is we sort through the noise and find under the radar policymakers who have outsized climate impact. Dylan, what about you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Caroline, and the amazing work that you've done. And I can't wait to talk about it more with you during this conversation. Hi, everyone. My name is Dylan. I'm a current junior studying political science and government here at Stanford. And so it sounds like we've done a lot of the same programs and being affiliated with the Haas Center and, being part of this important election cycle. But first, I want to ask you a question. Can you please just tell me more about where you're from and what drew you to public service?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting about folks, especially in our kind of general generation, is that we've all grown up experiencing the impacts of climate firsthand. And I know that's absolutely true for me. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and we evacuated from hurricanes growing up. And so it was this interesting combination where I was growing up in the oil and gas capital of the US, now a growing capital for geothermal energy and wind and solar and batteries and transmission lines, which is very exciting. And it's this energy capital in transition. And one great story that illustrates that is in high school, I had two science teachers, my ninth grade science teacher and my 10th grade science teacher. And the ninth grade science teacher told our science class, that climate change was not true, that it was not accurate. And our 10th, and 1 year later, my 10th grade science teacher said it was an existential threat to the planet. And if that doesn't illustrate the dichotomy of growing up in Houston, I don't know what does. But that tension is what really drew me to climate in general. And at Stanford, I dove into the intersection of these topics and that tension. So from Stanford and government, all Haas programs, right? So from Stanford and government to Students for a Sustainable Stanford, I did internships in DC at Stanford and Washington. And I think specifically what really stands out to me about the programs is the combination. So yeah, I was getting an engineering degree, but I had these incredible resources through Haas that helped me combine engineering and policy. And if you're involved in the climate fight at all, we have to combo not just our engineering knowledge, but we also have to, social science is critically important, policy is critically important. And that was the kind of overlapping thinking that Haas was able to bring to my Stanford experience. Dylan, what's resonating with you? What does that bring up in your mind?
Yeah, for sure. I think that one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is kind of the intersectionality of climate change and other systemic issues as well. I think growing up, I live in Southern California, but my parents are immigrants from the Philippines. And I think one of the biggest things is wildfires that affect, people of color like me and other minority communities. I remember when I was a very young boy going to middle school and just seeing the entire sky being just completely orange because of wildfires and being exposed to wearing N94 masks before COVID-19 was even a thing. And I think that led me in high school to really think about wildfires as also a public policy issue. I remember, writing papers about it and writing a paper specifically about how, there is this library called the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library where I lived, and they would use goats to do fuel break management and fire mitigation in the area. But at the exact same time, what happened was that we didn't divert resources to other parts of the city where we had a lot of residents, especially in East Simi Valley, that did not get as much resources. And so I think what drew me to public policy was that it's really the essence of service and why I really wanted to go to Stanford in the first place. And I think that for me, as a freshman, I would go to the Haas Center. I always tell people it was like this big mansion on a hill. And I would just go to the Haas Center and, just be exposed to the programs. I remember being part of my dorm, Otero. It was a public service dorm on campus, and being exposed to students that had interest when it came to sustainability, but also the public policy behind it, the chemistry behind it, and the various interdisciplinary ways that we can attack service. And so that inspired me to really do Cardinal Quarters. And so Cardinal Quarters as an opportunity through the Haas Center to work in public service opportunities over the summer. I got to work for my congresswoman in the House of Representatives, where I met Secretary John Kerry, who talked about how he thought that the climate change crisis, that he called it, was almost immovable, that we can't really do anything anymore. But I was inspired to really work and convince my congresswoman to focus on the issue at hand. And so from there, I worked at the Department of Justice doing environmental work, and now here at Stanford, I work for Stanford Votes, really energizing people for this election, but also making sure that people understand that sustainability and climate change is also a big public policy issue. And so, during your talk, Caroline, I also heard a lot about climate cabinet, but I also want to know more about the organization. I'm curious about your experience with it and also your affiliation with Stanford and government as well.
Yeah. Okay. It's so fun to hear that you did Cardinal Quarters, because now at Climate Cabinet, because of this program that we knew about, we hire interns from this is a great way where we can kind of be in a spot where we can continue the pathway for service for folks. And so we post to Cardinal Quarters and we get great, able to offer internship opportunities, summer opportunities, fall opportunities through Cardinal Quarters. So it's funny to say, but we're still using Haas resources, and the programs and the incredible community that Haas has built lives beyond 4 years. It's been great to work with Cardinal Quarters internships. The other wild overlap that Dylan and I both have is that we also both worked at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. And what I remember, I actually would love to hear a little bit about what you focused on. I was there for 10 weeks. It was through Stanford and Washington, and I did 10 weeks of NOx emission scandals. It was like who cheated on their NOx emissions and how, and that is all I did for 10 weeks. It was Volkswagen, it was Navistar, it was Harley Davidson. It was like, in how many vehicle formats can people, can we fix kind of NOx emissions for people through the Department of Justice? So that's a fun, when Dylan and I first met, we were like just bouncing off because we have so many overlaps through Haas, which has been great. And now, like, how that translates into my current life is my very first internship at Stanford was working in the California state legislature. And now what I do at Climate Cabinet is we support state legislators because I got that experience and was able to combine that with climate and said, we have these folks that are in these offices around the country. They get overlooked, but they're super, super critical. These state legislators are passing 100% clean energy standards. They're passing utility oversight bills. They're deciding kind of, are we going to build the clean energy economy and are we not? And who feels the impact of a coal power plant? That's the power that these state legislators have. And so you can draw this fun through line from internships that I had through Haas and what Climate Cabinet does today to help lawmakers pass climate policy across the country. So yeah, it's good overlaps. Dylan, I know you've done some interesting work both on climate and on democracy. What are some experiences that you've had on this topic as well?
Yeah, for sure. I just quickly just pivot back a tiny bit. I mean, working at the Department of Justice was awesome. I think we worked on kind of different projects, but also in the same type of realm. I worked on migratory bird policy. So basically, the change administration led to this rule change when it came to how do we make sure that we're not killing migratory birds when we're introducing sustainable wind power and introducing new renewable energy. So that was super cool. And I'm glad that we're able to, get this opportunity through Haas as well. And kind of the breadth of opportunities through the center. And I think also when it comes to the interdisciplinary sense of the climate crisis, democracy is front and center. And so I think when it came to my, background, I was interested in sustainability, but also when it came to the issue of education. And so I took a class in high school. It was called AP Research. And what I was noticing was that there was this trend in North Carolina, in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District, where you had students from one high school that were 2 miles away from a really well-funded high school. But because they were people of color, minorities, and was part of a former red line community, they were sent to a high school 9 miles away and had to be bused there. And what I found was that there was huge educational gerrymandering. And so I was researching how can we make sure that we create school systems and school districts that make education so accessible. And I think that this intersects well with climate change because of how climate change is taught in your schools. And you mentioned previously how, you weren't even taught that climate change was a real thing. And that's something that I see, even here in California, for instance. And so how do we make sure that we create an education that's, good for all students, but also something that's equitable for all students as well? And so here at Stanford, I was able to, work with Professor Francisco Ramirez, talking about the roots of education and how we should think about status and the dominant group and just like forms of capitalism and how do we implement democracy with it. And I think that when it comes to the climate crisis, that's just so tangential, and so forth. And so I was wondering from your end, as well, you also have an interdisciplinary view on climate change. I'm from more public policy, political science, but you're an engineering student. And so I was wondering how you were able to make public policy and also being an engineering student align with the goals of the Haas Center and so forth.
Yeah, I think, Stanford has a great reputation as an engineering institution, but I think sometimes it's easy for students to get to school and sometimes go to the career fair and not really it's easy to step into that engineering fast track and go and never take a moment in your 4 years to kind of poke your head above water and say, how are we engineering systems that interact with human beings in the world? And I think that's what I really appreciated about all these programs. It's the ability to create little eddies in that flow to say, hey, you can, major in whatever you want to major in, but let's make sure that you're getting a well-rounded and interdisciplinary experience. So that meant like some of that framework meant that I got an engineering degree. I went to work for a solar company. I worked in solar project finance, and I was a financial analyst, and I was in charge of we wanted to build over 300 projects across the US, across 15 states, and I was in charge of the big Excel spreadsheet. So it was like I was like the numbers person, or I was calling people up, what are the numbers, putting them in a massive Excel spreadsheet and saying, where are we going to build clean energy in this country? But the part of my brain that was policy oriented went beyond just that engineering and that finance problem and said, why? Why are we building over 60 projects in the state of Massachusetts and none in the state of Arizona? That's not federal. There's something else going on here. And because I had these experiences, I also did a gerrymandering project through Haas. So because I had these series of experiences, I was able to take the built environment in that solar environment and apply a public policy lens to it. And I started digging and digging and digging. And I found these elected officials who were under the radar, don't get talked about, but were killing the solar industry in Arizona. And pretty shortly after that, I left my job and started Climate Cabinet to fix that problem. So that's what I do today. Yeah, I mean, that's how I personally combine engineering and public policy. And it's like letting students do what they want to do, but if you create these little eddies, it really allows these opportunities for interdisciplinary learning. And yeah, that's what I really appreciate about my experience. Dylan, in your experience, what do you think helps get students engaged in public service, and what are some impacts of that? Why do you think that's important as a student on campus right now?
Yeah, I think that, understanding that there's just so many different students on this campus, but the opportunity to enter into service and to be affiliated with the Haas Center is something that I want to see for all students and expanding that opportunity. Currently, I'm a peer advisor at the Haas Center. And so in my peer advisor capacity, I help students in all facets of Cardinal service. So that be Cardinal Quarter, Cardinal careers, you go out to a career in public service, a commitment. So Cardinal commitment committed to a single or multiple public service organizations, as well as our Cardinal courses. We have over, I believe, 100 courses dedicated to students to do public service in their work. And so I think that it just spans from CS for social good to Stanford and government. And I think that breadth of knowledge, but also opportunities is something that's great for students to be involved in. I think another thing that students should be involved in, especially considering this election year, is definitely to be part of our Democracy Day initiative. This year, Stanford, along with Stanford in Government, Stanford Votes, Stanford Women in Politics, Stanford Political Union, and the Democracy Day Committee have created the Democracy Hub. And so there's this hub of organizations there to ensure that students are feeling re-energized about democracy, but also to be part of our events. So on Election Day, it's a free day off for students where students can go ahead and volunteer and also to be a part of our numerous programming, such as our public service career mixer, where you can get to interact with other public servants that were alum of Stanford, as well as being a part of going to our various, voting, poll worker trainings, and our Election Day event to watch the polls come in as well. And I think that overall, I really just do appreciate the education aspect of the Haas Center as well. We're, working with Priscilla and getting, East Palo Alto kids as part of the organization is something that I really appreciate. Is something why I think that just public service overall is just so expansive. And I just think that for me, the Haas Center has been great in terms of making those opportunities available to all students. And so for you, I want to kind of pass on the question, why do you think public service is important and how do you think students should partake from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about what it means for students to get involved in democracy and get involved in that intersection of climate democracy, youth voter turnout is consistently extremely low. It hovers between 5% and 20% of eligible young people actually show up to the ballot box and show up to vote. And that has a big impact on policy. Young people are more concerned about climate. They want to solve this issue. They have a different perspective on climate and on justice and what it means to have a fair society. And when young people turn out and vote, their voices get heard and those opinions make it into the policymaking process in a way that they just don't if young people aren't showing up. So as I'm thinking about this election over the next few weeks and what it means for climate, one thing I'm really tracking is student engagement and student turnout. And just I've been on doors I was talking to students on Sunday actually about what is motivating to them in the election. And people want to see how it matters to them. And the more programs and hooks we create to show young people this is how policy and politics can affect you, this is how it can create how I feel about policy and politics is this is what creates my future and this is what dictates the next few decades of my life, to be quite simple. And the same is true for climate. Climate's an existential threat. We're doing everything we can to solve this issue. Right now, I think sometimes you can get into, sure, everyone on this call will resonate with some piece of this. Sometimes you can get into school and it can feel really overwhelming. And it's really easy to just take the classes that everybody else is taking and kind of roll through college. But building kind of a culture and an opportunity of civic engagement, especially right now, is really important. And I'm so excited to hear about all of the voter turnout and the voter engagement that you're doing, nonpartisan voter education, just saying your voice matters. Let's make sure that your opinions matter in the election. So yeah, if I gave one piece of advice to students, I would say just start doing something. I think a lot of times people search around for the best thing. Stanford does track people who are good at solving for the best thing, highest value over time, but sometimes it's a more exploratory learning process. You try a bunch of stuff and that's what school is for. And it's great that, Dylan, it's great to hear about all the opportunities that you're specifically creating through your mentorship, through your programs for other students to get involved. Yeah, that's what's really, I'm really excited about all the work you're doing, and I'm glad you're hosting a watch party and all of those pieces.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, also my takeaway too is, try new things. I think there's so many opportunities here at Stanford and also to, be part of the Haas Center. But I think another, piece of advice I want to give to students is like, you can also drop things. I remember in my freshman year, I was in like 10 different clubs. I would have like back-to-back meetings in the DK room. But at the end of the day, now as a junior, I'm in, a few activities, but really deepening my impact and my commitment to them. And I think that that's something I want to leave off, try new things, but it's okay to drop things. I think here at Stanford, there's just so many different opportunities you can definitely be a part of. So definitely go in, but at the end of the day, you are a full-time student. So, ensure that you're focusing on your mental health and focusing on your well-being overall, but know that the Haas Center and all the Cardinal service opportunities and people are there to really help you succeed here at Stanford and beyond, as you have done, and so forth.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great chatting with you today. I'm so glad to talk. And like I said, we have so many combined interests. This has been fun.
Yeah, same here, Caroline. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dylan and Caroline. It was interesting to hear how you both approach climate policy, but from different entry points and with a lot of overlap, but how principled public service is kind of a foundational piece for each pathway. So thanks again for sharing that conversation with us. I now want to pivot to introduce our faculty speaker, and I'm going to spend some time actually doing it because our faculty speaker is incredibly humble and will not do it themselves. So we're going to hear from Dr. Holmes Hummel, Managing Director of Energy, Equity, and Just Transitions at the Precourt Institute for Energy, which is part of the Dorr School. Dr. Hummel is a scholar plus so much more. In fact, Dr. Hummel is an interdisciplinary solutionary focused at the intersections of energy policy, technology, and finance. At Stanford, Dr. Hummel is drawing on 2 decades of experience that includes work in academia, private sector, public policy, and civil society organizations in order to accelerate just transitions by integrating concepts and practices of energy equity into education and research. Dr. Hummel is the founding co-director of Clean Energy Works, a public interest organization that accelerates investment in the clean energy economy. Previously, Dr. Hummel served as the senior policy advisor in the Department of Energy Office and Policy and International Affairs during the Obama administration. Furthermore, as if there could be more, Holmes is the founding resident fellow of Explore Energy House, which is a residence hall with more than 80 co-housed undergraduate scholars with a shared interest in energy as an academic theme for their residential education. Following Dr. Hummel's presentation, we'll bring back the full panel on screen and open it up for Q&A. As you will notice on Holmes's tag there, Holmes actually got 3 varsity letters at Stanford. They got their undergraduate, master's, and PhD. So Holmes, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Kamba, that is a very generous and comprehensive recount of my journey, which brings me to the privilege of being involved in this production today. It's true that I am the first director for energy equity and just transitions at Stanford's Institute for Energy, but without the Haas Center for Public Service, I doubt that would have happened. And today, as we gather with the theme of energy equity and climate action as the through line for all of the participants, I have to say I'm very humbled to hear the stories of people who I think resonated with the younger person in me in the 1990s, who arrived at Stanford looking for answers to the calls of our time and realizing that it required participating in the generational project of transformation. There weren't going to be quick fixes, but there were going to be people who could help with the chiropractic care of transformation at scale. That's a little bit different than innovation at scale, investment at scale, transformation at scale. And through public service leaders like Nadine Cruz, I got a chance to learn about social movements and the ways of engaging systems of power that allowed us to express social interests and aligning the skills that we were learning in our classroom with our intent for purposeful impact in the world. Now, I moved on from my days dwelling in the Haas Center in some of its earliest years in the 1990s, where I learned grassroots organizing techniques. I actually helped bring the grassroots organizing workshops to Stanford, help hundreds of people learn how to do grassroots organizing. It wasn't a class, it wasn't a thing that was offered, but the Haas Center made sure that we had access to these extracurricular opportunities because they were relevant to our potential for contribution. I also had the privilege of hearing from John Gardner and Donald Kennedy, impressing upon me what public service could mean in my career. I did not pay attention to them. I went out to the Silicon Valley, joined a startup, was a part of the entrepreneurial class, and within years, I was back at Stanford's door asking, couldn't there be other vectors to a larger transformative potential? That's how I re-entered after one of those successful degrees that Kamba was giving me a wink about. It's true, I had to come back for a second round to understand these intersectional dynamics. And it led me to a Congressional Science Fellowship in Washington, D.C., where I really felt the tables turned on the public service pursuits as a petitioner to somebody who was actually then saddled with the responsibility of going home at night with the weight of the world and the constituents' interests on my desk. I later, a decade later, came back to Stanford again. And this time it was in the wake of grief following the loss of confidence in our country in the wake of George Floyd's murder. And the expressions of social distress across the landscape brought the faculty members at Stanford who teach the foundational courses on energy, if I would join my colleague Anthony Kinslow and speak to their class. That's how I returned to Stanford. When the Understand Energy faculty said, we need to be more relevant to what's happening outside of our classroom. We can see and hear everything that's happening outside of our classroom. Our students need answers. We need you to bring the equity analysis of your career into this curriculum. The following fall, after that recorded session was circulated among Stanford's faculty, Anthony Kinslow and I came back to introduce the foundational courses on energy justice. Those include Quest for Inclusive Clean Energy Economy, Racial Equity in Energy, and the Energy Equity Policy Lab, which is one of the first Cardinal service courses that were at that intersection of energy equity and climate action. The most recent expression of the Energy Equity Policy Lab is spatial planning for gigascale renewable energy and transmission. I want to unpack that for a minute. It means people making maps about where we think we're going to put a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't exist yet to make energy that could allow rapid retirement of fossil assets to be safe and sound. It turns out that it's an extremely popular pursuit for people in data science and computer science to participate in energy revolutions using those skills, but they didn't want to do it in a classroom setting, looking, as Hannah gave you her screenshot, only at her screen. We partnered with California Environmental Justice Alliance. Mary Rose Turok, who had been a guest speaker at Stanford's own Energy Government Forum in January, signed on to be the community partner and brought the members of the California Environmental Justice Alliance through the Haas Center's Cardinal Service Course program into our classroom, where we met every week with people who are in place-based, community-based organizations trying to change not only the systems of power that were creating environmental injustices where they were, but to change the power system that they were going to get at the end of a clean energy revolution that centered their concerns. Today, I'm privileged to serve as an advisor on the Partnerships for Climate Justice in the Bay, which again, Hannah really did justice to at the beginning, and also on the Faculty Steering Committee for the Haas Center for Public Service, which has a broader scope of work, but has given us really unmatched leadership right now in the university's engagement with people who are understanding that the tools of transformation are not only in the innovations that we get out of the Energy Lab, but also what we can do to transform the institutions that are framing our chances and everyone's chances for a path to opportunity that is more equitable, and using those outcomes to bring more equitable solutions for clean energy into the places that need them most. To keep within the bounds of our time and to give the balance to the possibilities for exchange with the guests here today, I want to underscore that I am contributing today as a very humbled and privileged person, imprinted by the Haas Center for Public Service, the leaders who invested in a generation of young people who've now grown up to be people like me. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you, Holmes. It's always great to get faculty perspective, but also your perspective that you bring not only as faculty, but also having been student, going out into the real world and then coming back. I think it adds a real level of richness to what you had to say. So thank you for taking time. I'm actually now going to invite, via the power of technology, invite all our speakers to come back on screen again so we can do a brief Q&A from the pre-submitted questions, and look at that. It happens. That's fantastic. Yeah, there we go. This is always hard because there are more questions than we have time for, and we'll get really excited, and at a certain point I'll have to say, I apologize, but for time's sake, this is going to be the last question. But before we get there, I heard from both Dylan and Caroline kind of your thoughts and exhortations to students about how to get involved with public service. Hannah, I'm also curious from your perspective, you also seem very passionate about what you're doing. What advice would you give to someone who's coming to Stanford without maybe an understanding of principled public service or opportunities available to them? How would you talk to them about their passions and getting engaged?
Yeah, thanks, Kamba. I think this space does look very different as a graduate student. And I think one way to think through what does community engagement do for a PhD, for research, is to think about, okay, if you're engaging with community, people on the ground, and not just your data sets, right? That helps us ask better questions in research. It makes sure that when we do research, it's going to be more easily applied to the context that we're working in. I think for people like myself who are not considering necessarily traditional academic careers, it's also really important to have opportunities to engage with different kinds of stakeholders and to explore different kinds of career options where you can use research in a really applied way. And I think, I mean, personally, this is where I get my energy from, right? Like, it can be very siloing and isolating to do a PhD for 5 years. And I think being able to ground yourself in the local community and local partnerships, that can really sustain a lot of the energy, at least for myself. But I also want to acknowledge that it's really difficult often to do this work. And it's time consuming. It's not necessarily rewarded in the academic pursuit of things. There's a lot of uncertainty that comes with it. Someone you're working with might leave, there are things that you can't control. And so in my mind, that's where the Haas Center is really adding value to the graduate school experience through people like Clayton Hurd, who's the director of community-based research and has a lot of really great programming. I mean, I go to Clayton when I have questions, and fellowships like PCJ in the Bay that give you external funding that's not connected to your advisor, that actually gives you freedom and flexibility to say, I am a full human and let me just go and spend the summer doing something in the community, right? So in my case, my research is directly linked to the work that I did in PCJ and that fellowship. But there are people in my fellowship year, there's another PhD student doing the program. He was in engineering. His research had nothing to do with his fellowship experience at Belhaven Action, and was really just taking the summer to reconnect, engage, and recharge. And I think that that's also an equally as valuable opportunity that PCJ can give. And I think finally, it's easy to do community engaged research in a bad way. And there is a long history of research being done in an extractive way, especially for more vulnerable communities. And so I think it's so helpful to have the Haas Center and people at the Haas Center really get it and think, okay, we do need to make this more inclusive. And so, for example, with the workshop that we're hosting next week and then the Spanish one the week after that, the Haas Center is going to be providing food and childcare so that residents in the community can come and they don't have those barriers to participating. So, I mean, in my mind, I think the Haas Center just really gets how to do that and is a super helpful resource for grad students who are committed to this kind of work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you said, as you made a comment about extractive, and there's a way to do it incorrectly, I think I saw both Holmes and Caroline. I saw your heads nod, so would love to hear your thoughts on that and what led to that head nodding. Caroline?
Holmes speaks very eloquently on this subject. I'm going to pass it to Holmes. You won't get a better answer.
Well, we're a part of an institution with a reputation for elitism that individuals associated with it cannot shake. We're not entitled to shed the logo of the letterhead when we enter into our engagements with people, entities at every level and every place around the world. And of course, Stanford has made great strides. I want to mark the moment when our board of trustees finally agreed to meet every ounce of demonstrated financial need for every undergraduate applicant in the pool. And it changed dramatically the way that the student body could experience their peer group going through the experience of earning a college degree. But that's not enough for us to lay a calling card on the desk of community partners without doing the positionality work that allows us some introspection. Who are we? What are we trying to learn? From whom and why? How? Where? When? Clayton Hurd and the team that Luke Terra is a part of with Brendan Riante and Alex Wheeler, I name them all as individuals who are in the community engaged learning and research portion of the Haas Center for Public Service focused on energy and climate justice. And they are ministering to every type of scholar in every discipline how to apply the Haas Center principles for ethical and effective service. And without them, we might make more unforced errors. It's a baseball reference. But the kind of mistakes you don't need to make, but we can. And our institution will lead us to have an unconsciousness or a blind spot about the places where we should be most alert if it weren't for the experts at the Haas Center for Public Service coaching us into that acuity. I don't want to name names or lift up projects that did not actually honor the interests of communities the way that they should. But I would say that Stanford is still an aspirational institution in this regard. And most recently, I've become gripped by the insights that have been gained from projects led by the community resilience champions in the University of California system, including Stanford alumna Abby Reyes. And we should take heart that there are alumni everywhere who can help us continue to uphold the highest standards that we can when we pursue community engaged research and learning.
Yes, absolutely, Holmes. Thank you. I'm going to pivot over to you, Dylan. You talked about Stanford in government and Stanford votes and your own experience at the DOJ. I'm curious about how you think about levels of government, because Caroline was also talking about, look, there isn't just one election happening. There are over 500,000 that are elected in each cycle. Curious kind of your thoughts about levels of government as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, here in our own district, I mean, we have a representative race between, two qualified individuals, but at the exact same time, we have so many local election races in Palo Alto, Santa Clara County, and all over the Bay as well. I think being part of Stanford in government, our mission this year is to demonstrate to people that we're more than just federal, but we're also international and we're local. And I think one of the best things as part of our fellowships is that we have students working at the San Jose, Department of Parks and Recreation, to students that had the opportunity to work in Geneva and in the UN. And I think that having these opportunities are just great for students to be involved in all aspects of government, but at the exact same time, exposing them to the various public service opportunities at their home here at Stanford, because we're such a great institution to get people into public service through the Haas Center. And I'll pass it on to Caroline because, she worked also in the Department of Justice, but also, her organization, we were able to give a stipend for and for students to be involved in as well.
Yeah, one piece that's been like I think about when I think about kind of how we move people towards a more active kind of framework of public service, I think a lot about community, and I think a lot about culture and what are we doing to change the culture of our community and change who we're in partnership with to make sure that we get more and more people onto this public service ladder of engagement. That's something I think about a lot, because I think sometimes you can look at it and be like, this is complicated. Like, policy is complicated. Policy is messy. There are really good best practices, and how do we get people up to speed on those best practices as fast as possible? It's something I think about a lot, and in my own kind of alumni journey, engaging, we talked about Cardinal quarters, engaging with that, and giving. One of the things I've been thinking about is how do we get students opportunities to just have a taste of, no matter what you do after this, this is what public service can look like. And you just have that little model. Like, people rarely jump into a career of public service
to
without
explore.
A model. Yeah, a little bit of a model, a little bit of, oh, I tried that one thing and now I can build off of it. And I'm doing it with my friends, and I'm doing it in community, and I'm doing it with people that I think, we live online a lot, and it's great to do things in person with other folks. And that's that community element is something I think about a lot in the alumni journey, and how am I reaching back to pull students in and say, this is what you can do. This is exciting. You can do whatever you want after this internship, but this is a pathway and this is a model. And if you want to build on it, that small piece is always there.
Yep. And I presaged that this might happen, that we would run out of time. My production manager is I actually don't have a production manager, but we're getting close to time. I want to do a final 30-second answer from each of you, building on from you, Caroline, about engagement. There are a lot of people on this webinar who are alumni. What's your take from your perspective about how alumni can get involved in this sort of work, or Dylan, maybe from your perspective with undergraduate students, Holmes, your perspective with faculty, but just 30-second answer about how can alumni get engaged in this?
Yeah, I would say if any forming, Haas has a great alumni network, and the more that we can build out connectivity among all of us. So reach out to me if you want to talk after this. I'm so happy to have a conversation. And also something that I think about a lot is, how do I proactively reach out to people who are also kind of Haas alums and get them into my network and build as we build together, because people go on to do really interesting things.
Brilliant. Hannah, how about you?
So in my fellowship experience, one of my colleagues at One Shoreline, she was a Stanford alum. Another one of our collaborators at Climate Resilient Communities was a Stanford alum. And I think I've been really inspired to see in this work where everyone is going and how that network continues to grow. I think Caroline said before that the Haas Center creates an incredible network. And I think the other piece too is the 10 different partners in the Bay Area. I see them working together more and more. And that's local government agencies, CBOs, all working together. And I think continuing to build that is a huge priority. PCJ is coming to a kind of end of a 5-year funding position. And so also I think giving is a massive way that alumni can ensure that programs like this continue into the future.
Brilliant. Thanks, Hannah. Holmes?
It's amazing how many Stanford alumni can facilitate the kind of partnerships that produce transformative educational experiences. And that includes the NGOs that host Cardinal Quarter summers for the students. There's a link on the Haas website where any NGO that you know can sign up to be considered for a Stanford-sponsored placement of an awesome student that can have transformative potential in their organization this summer. Every alumni can take that step. There are also alumni who have real involvement with organizations that could be good partners for Cardinal service courses, like the kind that I teach. For any organization that you're involved in, where there's an educational aim aim or an opportunity for collaboration, there are faculty members that are looking for good partners and really need the benefit of the doubt to extend into those. I think of the alumni reunion weekend coming up, just weekend after next. Stanford will gather for its first time the affinity groups on climate tech, sustainability, climate, and energy. It's at 12 o'clock on Saturday, October the 26th at the Educational Farm. If you can get there, get there. But even if you can't, all 4 of those affinity groups have more than 1,000 members. They have LinkedIn networks, and they have their own, it's called Stanford Pass platform. If you're not connected, it's hard to stay connected. So please do find opportunities to be in a relationship. That's the best way for the Haas Center for Public Service and all the faculty members who are seeking to integrate their educational endeavors with it to find you and for you to be involved with it. Thanks.
Love it. Seems very actionable. So appreciate you sharing that. Dylan, take us home.
Yeah, I just think as a student, we want opportunities in public service. And I think that our alum are just great assets for that. I remember I was at the National Advisory Board meeting for the past 2 days, and there were alum there that want students to work for them, work for their organizations. There are students out there that are working in STEM, that are working in political science, that are working in fields that will benefit your organization, NGO, any type of public service you're doing. And there's so many students that want to complete a Cardinal quarter, but they simply can't because there's not enough opportunities for them. If we can just get alum to really demonstrate that there are so many opportunities that they can provide, I think that's something that students would want. And so please reach out to Valerie Chow. She's in charge of our Cardinal Quarter Outreach Program, and also Director of Outreach, Roger Vaswani, in order to really make sure that we're creating those community partnerships that we've been talking about through this entire webinar.
Brilliant. Thank you all. As a former basketball player who had to watch the shot clock, I'm a little bit bummed that we are going over the time limit, but this was so rich and so helpful. Thank you all for your time. I know there were very specific names and things mentioned. We will share those out or have a way for any of the webinar participants to connect with that. We also got some questions that came in. Holmes, there was a question about the Clean Energy House, and unfortunately, we don't have time for that, but really want to say, Dylan, Hannah, Caroline, Holmes, thank you all for your time today and for all the work that you do.
Thanks for hosting.
Real privilege. Thank you, Kamba, and thanks to all.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I wanted to just, before we go off, again, thank our speakers, but wrap us up by saying, I've always personally thought of Stanford as a school of and. In fact, it's right there in our name. Stanford is incredibly interdisciplinary. But what I heard today is that in addition to that interdisciplinarity is the role for transdisciplinary, which is how do you include community and non-academic stakeholders in process and knowledge building? It was really interesting to hear that. So as we wrap up, I'll note that we're quickly approaching the 10th anniversary of Cardinal Service Initiative, as well as Haas Center's 40th anniversary. Both of those coincide in 2025. And we look forward to including you in events and festivities as we celebrate the past, the present, and the future of public service at Stanford. If you want to share any thoughts with us, please feel free to do so by filling out the survey link that'll go in the chat. Among the 9 questions, there's a place to share just any additional comments, so please take advantage of that. Again, thank you for joining our 5th annual Cardinal Service webinar, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.